Hello, my friends and fellow seekers. I hope you're all having an excellent day. This is the second video that I'm doing on the Gospel of Mary. There's so much cool stuff I want to tell you all about. But let me get right into it. The first copy of the Gospel of Mary that we've discovered is called the Berlin Papyrus. It was written in Coptic, in CITED Coptic, which is a dialect of a late stage Egyptian language, which is still used in liturgical services by Egyptian Christians. This particular copy of the Gospel of Mary is the largest and the longest version that we have, and it was part of a bundle of old papyri that was purchased in 1896 by a German diplomat and amateur Egyptologist who was named Karl Reinhardt. It was apparently found in a wall wrapped in feathers to protect it, which I thought was very cool. It must have been a stone wall because I wouldn't think a wooden wall would last for 15 centuries, you know. I know that the Nag Hammadi was found in a cave in stone as well, so it makes sense to me. But anyway, this particular the entire bundle of papyri is still being preserved today in the National Museum of Berlin, and that's why the entire bundle is called the Berlin Codex. And when I say bundled, I mean that there are leaves, individual writing papers from 4 different texts: the Gospel of Mary, the Apocryphon of John, the Sophia of Jesus Christ, and a summary of the Act of Peter. And they're all stitched together between wooden boards that are, they function as book covers for it. Yeah, one of the interesting things is the boards on the Berlin Codex are covered with some kind of leather-like substance, which apparently hasn't been fully analyzed yet, because all I can find out to date is that the substance isn't parchment, it isn't tanned leather, and it isn't an animal skin softened with alum. So a small mystery that I have yet to find the answer to. I don't know why they haven't analyzed it more fully yet. So the really weird thing to me is that the Gospel of Mary, sorry about the outside noise, the Gospel of Mary is the very first of the texts in the bundles and has each page numbered at the top, which is how we know that the first 6 pages and 4 of the middle ones, numbers 11 through 14, are completely missing. And even more intriguing to me was that I couldn't find out if the missing pages were torn from the codex or if the bits that we have were bound in with those pages already missing. But what that means is at least half of the original gospel is still missing. And it makes me wonder what amazing commentary was in there that was so radical, at least at the beginning of this and at the middle, that it had to be thrown away. So that makes me wonder. As far as more physical description, the leaves, the individual leaves of the Gospel of Mary are on average about 4 inches by 5.3 inches, which means these are little tiny pieces. Like I was measuring my hand, and from the knuckle to the side, that's about 4 inches, and then 5.3 would be about, let's see, there we go, about there. So these are just little bitty pieces of papyrus. And they don't write out to the very edges because the edges are the weakest part. That's where the material has been pounded the thinnest. So the writing also is that they basically make lines on the page and then they write very carefully on the lines. On average, there's between 21 and 23 lines on each page. And again, on average, there's about 22 to 23 letters per each line. And the script is beautiful and clear. I'm going to see if I can find a picture of it to put up so that you can see at least some of the pages and how they look. Also, there are 2 other much shorter fragments of the Gospel of Mary. I think they're only like 1 or 2 pages each. They were found much later, but they were actually written down and created much earlier, which is kind of interesting and confusing when I first read about it. Also, they're written in ancient Greek, and in both cases, the only differences are 2 or 3 separate individual words, which is, or, you know, the words are transposed, which I thought was really interesting because I got to read a version where it showed side by side how the different versions were. And it really doesn't change the meaning. So from that time to about the 5th century BC, which is when the really nice copy, the bigger, more full copy of the Gospel of Mary was written, there really wasn't very much change. They kept it pretty clear. So one of the little fragments came from a bundle, and I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but I'm going to try. Came from a bundle called the Oxyrhynchus papyri, and that was discovered sometime around 1900, but it wasn't published until 1983. And due to examination of the papyrus and the ink and dating it, the creation of these two little fragments is dated to about the 3rd century. And as I said, the papyrus and the ink of the really fine copy, the Berlin papyrus, is dated to the early 5th century. So even more exciting, they did a close examination of the textual contents, not the physical papyrus, but what the text was talking about. And what they reveal is that the textual contents are of a much earlier date. So that's exciting too, because currently the Gospel of Mary itself, the story, is dated as either late 1st century or extremely early 2nd, which makes it roughly contemporary, which means that I need to speak English to you. I'm so sorry. Which makes it roughly contemporaneous with the Gospel of John. So scholars say that it is clear that the Gospel of Mary is familiar with the Gospel of John, but they were close enough that they could actually refer to each other. That was exciting. My personal guess is that the two earlier fractional scraps of the Gospel of Mary were very hastily copied by people who were sent out to proselytize in Egypt, because apparently one of them is written in the equivalent of all caps for that time period. And the other one was written in what one of the authors that I read called an awkward, rough hand. And my thought was, this would be the laborious scrawl of someone who'd either just barely learned how to write or was being seriously rushed. So I found myself wondering, were the writers taking dictation maybe, and that's why their writing seemed poor, or were they copying down surreptitiously during dictation, or excuse me, during a reading, and they were just quietly writing things down. So that was interesting to me. Another thing that I found really interesting is that there were a surprising number of issues with getting this fascinating new gospel, the only gospel that's attributed to a woman, to print. For example, the first translation was completed right around the turn of the century. Puppers? Sorry, petting my puppy here. Okay. The first translation was right around the turn of the century, around 1900-ish. And the copy edited version was all set up and it was stored in the basement. It was ready to be sent to the printers. And the next morning they came in to send it to the printers and they found out that the basement was flooded and everything in there was unfortunately lost. And shortly after that, the original translator, which I think it was Carl Schmidt, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Again, apologies. He was an old man and he died. And so the Gospel of Mary languished in obscurity for a couple more decades. And it was rediscovered in the late 1930s to early 1940s. And they got all ready to publish again. And then World War II broke out. And printing academic papers was considered a frivolous misuse of much needed goods. And so once again, the Gospel of Mary got accidentally lost. And in the end, it wasn't completely translated until 1955, and it didn't receive much attention until the 1970s, which was due to excitement over the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library. And once they started that, they started looking around, what other stuff do we have that we haven't brought forth and talked about. So that was very interesting. Despite fate's best efforts, we still got the Gospel of Mary. The other thing that I think is very interesting is there is a possibility that there is a new fragment that's been found. There's scholars that have proposed that yet another piece of the text surfaced. a papyrus, and it was published in 1923. And it has it's very small. I mean, it's like literally a little piece, kind of like that when you look at it. And it's a fragment, a dialogue between Jesus and a woman named Miriam. And its themes kind of echo what we see in the Gospel of Mary. And so some researchers have suggested that the fragment could be from the missing portions of the Gospel. Those researchers will be listed below. And warning ahead of time, I'm going to comment on this possibility before I've read their papers. So take my thoughts with a huge grain of salt, because I'm basically reading the little translation of the scrap, and I haven't read their reasons for why this should be part of the Gospel of Mary. Because my thoughts on reading the scrap, well, let me read the scrap to you. It's really short. Here's the fragment. Therefore I say to you, Mary, seek to combine water and fire, and you will no longer appear as an image of flesh, but as an image of the eternal, incorruptible light, bringing together from two intertwined and dissolved elements. And then there's some missing text, and then intellectual, and then some missing text, and then Mary. And that's it. Hopefully I was able to put up a graphic for you so that you can see how it actually looks. The square brackets are pieces that are missing, and the translators do their best to translate and to figure out what those missing bits are. And the dot, dot, dots, those are where there's a piece that's just gone. I mean, it's one thing to, the square brackets is stuff that may be blurry, or there might be a hole punched in the papyrus, but if there's a dot, 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 then there's a whole section that's just not there. So I hope that clarifies a bit. So my thoughts on this fragment is, to me, this seems, let me back up a bit. My thoughts as someone who is not a scholar of the Apocrypha, just someone who is a talented amateur. For those who know what that means, they'll get it. But anyway, to me, this seems a very, very Gnostic, very alchemical thought. It seems to suggest that the flesh is corrupt and has to be alchemically purified, rather than the flesh is simply part of nature, which is what the Gospel of Mary mentions several times about the body. So my thought was, is this potentially a focus or fixation on the impure material world, that sin is a type of adultery, which, you know, that kind of thing, which Jesus mentions in the known and verified Gospel of Mary. So one of the things, actually, you know what? I'm going to pause right there, because there's all kinds of neat stuff about the gospel that I want to tell you still, even more. But I'm going to save it for later for a couple of reasons. One, I haven't finished doing all my research, and I love doing the research. I want to make sure I cover it all for you. And two, the middle of the month will be the middle of February for the next section will be near the 14th of February, which is supposed to be Valentine's Day, which is a day that is supposed to be dedicated to love. And one of the things I've noticed about the Gospel of Mary is that even though it doesn't say focus on love, there seems to be a surprising amount of gentle emphasis to not stress, but to genuinely care for the world and for yourself and for your community, without considering them defiled or vile or dross, you know, the material world as being dross. So if you're interested, please come back. I'd love to talk to people some more about this. It's a lot of fun. And if you enjoyed this, please push the like button. If you have any questions, I would be delighted to answer. Leave a comment. The algorithm loves it, even if nobody else does. So, and that's it for right now. And I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this. Take care. And I'm very happy you were here. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.